Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell, by Keith Waterhouse, starring John Hurt.
Slightly rhyming verses for her friend Geoffrey Bernard by Elizabeth Smart. My dear Jeff, I can't say enough how much I admire the way you have used your marvelous muse, and how right she was to choose you. Because she's a rare bird who would have retired or died if you hadn't known how to amuse her and her you. That's one non-bogus marriage made on Parnassus and true. She knew exactly what and who she was letting herself in for. The real you. Drink, betting shops, and pubs are the sort of thing that rubs her up the right way. She'll always stay and make you more beautiful and witty every day. This is a loose love ode to one of my friends who is in my special collection of people who make amends for endless, excruciating, boring hours so often lived when foolishly pursuing stimulation, and none occurs. Sterne, Benchley, Laycock, Carroll, and Nash and Lear are not more dear to me than Bedrock Bernard.
"5 o'clock in the morning. Mark you, that's pub time. It really only 10 to. Ooh, hell. And answer came then on, as they say in the saloon bars. So, I'll have a vodka. Nobody can say I didn't try to get out. Still, there are worse places to find oneself locked in for the night than a pub, I suppose. I know a bloke who woke up at dawn in the back stalls of a cinema in Dover. All he could remember was a poster for high noon in the foyer and the fact that he'd got married at 12 o'clock the previous day in the Marylebone Registry Office. Well, he's divorced now. Can't even bring his ex-wife's name to mind. But he does remain a very great fan of Gary Cooper. Oh. At least the Coach and Horses has a roof. One night, when I was working on the Sporting Life, I woke up in a field outside Pontefract. And I still have no idea how I got there. Come to that, I've no idea how I got here. I must have come in for the one, then gone down to the bog and crashed out until well after closing time, and then I suppose I came back up here for the other one and quietly dozed off. Does happen. Another time, when I was on the Sporting Life, I remember opening my eyes to find myself in bed with Barry Brogan. Great jockey, true, but not my idea of a desirable bed companion. Then, on yet another occasion, I wasn't on the Sporting Life any longer.
Dear Mr. Bernard, it will come as no surprise to you that following your unpardonable exhibitions at the point-to-point dinner, which you attended as a representative of the Sporting Life on Friday evening, it is no longer possible for you to continue in our employ.
Oh, God, I was supposed to be making a speech. Something I'd never done before. I was so nervous, I went down to Sporting Life office at crack of dawn to work on it. Smithfield Market was open, so I thought if I had a couple of drinks to get me going, I'd probably write rather a good one. I drank steadily from 6 in the morning to 7 in the evening, at which time I arrived at the hotel where I was proposing to speak and immediately passed out. 2 waiters had to carry me upstairs, put me to bed.
I'm sorry this has become necessary, but you will agree you were given every chance. I'd be obliged if you would return to me your metal press badge at your earliest convenience. Yours faithfully, Editor, Sporting Life.
Some people are in the habit of writing angry letters to the press. I get it the other way round. The press is in the habit of writing angry letters to me.
Dear Geoffrey, are you going to do the fucking article, or aren't you? Yours, Miles Kington, Literary Editor, Punch.
I could die here. It's a good thing I can hold this stuff tolerably well. I mean, if I were a Yob or Hooray Henry, by the time the pub opens, I could be one of the cases found by the coroner to have choked on their own vomit. Disgusting phrase. When did you hear of anyone choking on someone else's vomit? I'm putting these on the slate, by the way. I don't believe in freeloading. Dear Sir, I add a few words to your excellent obituary of Geoffrey Bernard, who has regrettably died from choking. I knew him intimately for over 50 years, and I feel that many of his more remarkable qualities were left unsung in your otherwise comprehensive review of his messy life. He was born in 1932, probably by mistake, covered from head to foot in eczema. One of the first things he did was to wet the bed, and he continued to do so until he was 15. A weak, thin-skinned and oversensitive boy, he had few friends at school. He usually chose to sit at the very back of the classroom so that he could play with himself unobserved. His early obsession with sex prevented him from obtaining any worthwhile academic honours. By the time he left school, he had become a chain smoker and compulsive writer of fan letters to Veronica Lake. In 1946, he paid his first visit to Soho, and from that point, he was never to look forward. It was here, in the cafes and pubs of Dean Street and Old Compton Street, that he was to develop his remarkable sloth, envy, and self-pity. It was about this time we began to realise that Geoffrey was not cut out for a career as a naval officer as his mother had hoped. He drifted from job to job, and between jobs he spent some months at a time accepting small sums of money from homosexuals and friends. He began to develop a greed for unearned money and the growing conviction that he was cut out for better things. After a short, undistinguished spell in the army, from which he was given a medical discharge with his paybook marked mental stability nil, he returned to Soho, got married for the first time out of 4, and split up with his wife a few weeks later. It was during this period that he first became involved with horse racing and gambling, and the feelings of infantile omnipotence that this activity prompted were to last him for the rest of his life. These feelings were particularly noticeable in his dealings with women, and some even said that his life was a never-ending cliché of a search for a mother. His drinking began to escalate to such an extent that he was unable to hold down the most ordinary of jobs, and he was consequently advised to take up journalism. Even in this field, he was never offered a staff appointment, and he gradually drifted into writing a series of personal and at times embarrassing columns about his own wretched experiences. After a spell in the alcohol and drug addiction unit of St. Bernard's Hospital, no relation, Unwell, he developed the fantasy that starting tomorrow it would all be different. My last memory of Bernard is of seeing him staring at his typewriter and fighting yet another battle against his chronic amnesia. He leaves 2 unwritten books and a circle of detached acquaintances. Did you know, by the way, there's a bloke in America who sells talking tombstones? Before someone pegs out, as it might be a wife, they record a message on tape. And when the husband comes to put a jar of dandelions on her grave on Sunday, he presses a button, and lo, it's the same old story again.
So there you are. I'm amazed you managed to tear yourself away from the pub. Your dinner's in the oven. You're drunk again, aren't you? You make me sick. Honestly, I thought you'd changed and settled down. Don't you ever think of the future? Christ, this headache's killing me. And stop staring at that woman in the next grave. You didn't bother to come next Sunday. I'll be all right. Don't worry about me. You never did before, so why start now? Always thinking of yourself. Me, me, me. Good bloody bye. And where do you think you're taking those flowers? You make me sick!
I'll give old Norman a bell. The landlord. Maybe he'll come and bail me out. Old Norman. He likes being called Old Norman. That's why I do it. Sycophant that I am. He slings down a vodka, snarls, "There you are. Get your own fucking ice. Haven't you got anything smaller?" And we all say, "Good old Norman." Fancies himself as a bit of a character. Most landlords do. Have you noticed? And if they're not bits of characters themselves, they know plenty of people who are. One time, when I was working as a barman, the publican was one of those dreadful men who call you squire and think of themselves as your genial host. On my first day, he came up to me, where I was polishing the Smirnoff bottle, and said,
"You see that bloke going out? Now he's a bit of a character."
"Oh, well, Governor, mustn't keep me from my work."
Yes, would you believe that man must lose at least 6 umbrellas a year?
Well, well. I mean, I know the shortage of eccentrics is acute these days, but you'd think a pub landlord of all people could come up with someone slightly more interesting than an umbrella loser. Even I can do better than that. Dennis Shaw. Does that name mean anything? Now, there was a character. The face that closed 1,000 cinemas. He used to play B-villains and Gestapo men in those wonderfully awful British B pictures. 20 stone and encrusted in warts. Imagine a toad wearing a dinner jacket, and that was Dennis Shaw. Or Den, as he called himself. One night, that dear, sweet man, John Le Mesurier. Now, there was another character. One night, John Le Mes was walking along Piccadilly when he saw Dennis Shaw being bundled into the back of a Black Maria for drunk and disorderly. John Le Mes gave him one of his affable smiles and said,
"Hello, Dennis. Working?"
One night I was out on the piss with Den. Rather difficult enterprise, considering he was barred from every pub within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross, and we finished up in the Stork Club, where we went through the card. Dinner, the full works. A bottle of champagne for me and a bottle of Gordon's gin for Den. Now, I'd been paying all evening, and in any case, the bugger owed me for enough dinners to feed the 5,000. So when the bill came, I refrained from picking it up. So did Den. After a while, the waiters started stacking chairs on tables, and after another while, the cleaners arrived and started vacuuming the floor. But still we sat there, finishing Den's gin, with the bill untouched and unread on the table. Finally, the head waiter came over, and even in the cold, grey light of dawn, You could see his face turn white as he saw who it was.
Good morning, Mr. Shaw.
So, you remember me?
I do indeed, Mr. Shaw.
Tell this gentleman where we last met.
At the Pigalle, Mr. Shaw, when I was head waiter there.
Under what circumstances did we become acquainted?
You refused to pay your bill, Mr. Shaw.
Tell the gentleman what your response was to that.
I called the police, Mr. Shaw.
Call the bastards again!
He was a collector's item, was Den. Never lost an umbrella in his life. Found quite a few, though. Norman's got to be home. So he must be out for the count. I wonder if I put a call through to the engineers whether they could somehow make it ring louder. I think this copy of the Times has been left here for my benefit. One of those crappy features on the subject of alcoholism. Whatever the opposite of insomnia is, Norman has got it. An enviable talent. The only time I get a good sleep. Face down in the blueberry pie over lunch at the Groucho Club. Have you a drinking problem? Usual list of odd questions, and if you answer yes, it shows there's a serious cause for alarm. Trouble is, the more I look at these questions, the less alarmed I feel. In fact, I've just this minute come to the conclusion that I don't drink enough. I wish someone would pay me to write a quiz on boozing. I'd be laughing all the way to the Groucho. I wonder if they'd pay me to supply the answers.
Do you have time off work because of drinking, or has your work performance suffered because of alcohol?
The situation is very much the reverse. Work frequently interferes with my drinking. Besides, drinking is my work. I was once paid £500 for an article on this very subject.
Do your family...
Just a minute, I haven't finished. I'll have you know that I once fired my agent for being pissed all the time. I told her, one of us has to be sober, and it isn't going to be me.
Have there been family quarrels because of your drinking?
I believe there was a tremendous row in 1934 as to whether I should be fed Nestles or Cowan Gate.
And are you becoming difficult, irritable and testy after drinking?
You must be joking. I'm impossible. After closing time last Tuesday, I hit a Greek greengrocer in Goode Street who asked me not to feel his cucumbers.
Do you find your memory is getting worse?
Could you repeat the question?
Have you had loss of memory after a heavy drinking session?
Quite honestly, I can't remember ever having had a heavy drinking session.
Do you order yourself a double when the rest of your party are drinking singles? Or do you order yourself a quick extra drink when collecting an order from the bar?
None of my party drinks singles. I do have some style, you know. As to ordering a quick drink, I can tell you there's no such thing in this fucking place. It takes longer to get a drink in here than it takes to get a refund out of the Inland Revenue.
Has your sexual drive and ability suffered because of your drinking?
Mind your own fucking business.
And finally, do you...
Sorry, no more questions. It'll soon be opening time in Billingsgate.
You make me sick.
In fact, owing to some tablets I've been taking in conjunction with a small port, to which I'm not accustomed, that's what drunk chartered accountants always claim when hauled up at Bow Street, I find myself on the verge of suffering from impotence. Or incompetence, as some women call it. Though suffering's the wrong word. Impotence has its drawbacks, like you stand no chance of being held down and raped by 3 nubile girls, which is what once happened to a bloke on Malibu Beach, and the next night you couldn't see the ocean for the entire male population of Southern California. But it's not in the least uncommon, you know. There are 55,000 impotent men in the Avon and Somerset area alone. That's what I read in the Daily Telegraph. I wonder how they know. Were they shopped to the medical authorities by 55,000 disgruntled women? And why is the West Country so heavily afflicted? Could it be the cider? No. Apparently the causes of impotence are given as stemming from diabetes, alcohol, pelvic injuries, drugs and psychological problems. If smoking 60 of these things a day counts as a drug, then I'm holding a full house for the first time since I played poker in the army. But I personally welcome impotence, and I wish it would hurry up and come, so to speak. I raise my glass to it. Oh, not much else. What a release. For the first time since the age of 14, when I formed an ambition to be a sex object instead of a good seam bowler, I will no longer be led about by my prick. When I ponder the fact that my life lies in ruins solely because I have always followed the direction in which my various erections were pointing, I wish to God I'd been born a girl. Which reminds me, in the steam bath one day I found Solly, the 70-year-old taxi driver, staring at his private member and moaning.
We were born together. We grew up together. We got married together. We had children together. Why, oh why did you have to die before me?
Another of the delights of impotence is that I should set fire to the bed a bit less often. You see, I'm somewhat in the habit of being asked for cigarettes by ladies while lying in my bed. Not after the event. That's always been the man's prerogative. But before it. Usually what's happened is that I've jumped the gun by getting into bed in the belief I was being followed. But what these ladies do is light up a cigarette and then give you 100 specious reasons for having to go home.
My husband may be phoning from Paris.
My cat can't bear to be left alone.
But we've only known each other for a day.
Half a day.
Half an hour.
The babysitter will go mad if I'm late.
But people simply don't do it in broad daylight, do they?
One more advantage, by the way. Not having to wrestle with one-liners like those anymore means not having to put up with one-liners like these anymore after they've moved in.
And where do you think you're going?
You've been drinking.
Can we go home now, please?
Your dinner's in the oven.
You make me sick.
But to get back to the bedside manner...
I like you, Jeff. I like you a lot. But not in that way.
So I resign myself to the situation, take a Valium, fall asleep with the last fag in my mouth, wake up to find the bedspread in flames. I started keeping a fire extinguisher by my bed, but I never really knew whether to aim it at the mattress, the lady, if she was still there, or my private parts. Maybe he's taken a Valium too. Perhaps I should call the fire brigade. Come on, Norman. Some of us have got homes to go to, as you landlords so often remind us. And now I come to think of it, some of us haven't. Women again. Why haven't they got labels on their heads saying danger, government health warning, women can seriously damage your brains, genitals, current account, confidence, razor blades and good standing among your friends. Sometimes they walk out on you, sometimes they throw you out. All depending on whose bed you were in when you set it on fire. This time it was a throwing out job. At least I was allowed access to my worldly goods. All of this, one suitcase and 3 carrier bags. Love locked out is one thing, But when it's love plus your Mozart tapes, your spare clothes and shoes, and your framed photographs of yourself with Lester Piggott, it can well be unbearable while it lasts. Oh, I'm not forgetting some letters tied with barbed wire. I don't know why I bother keeping them, or why they bother writing them. They're all identical. A Ferrari coupe with one bronze arm leaning nonchalantly over the offside door, and who lives in a riverside penthouse with a Burmese cat, several gold medallions, bottle of aftershave, an extremely expensive hi-fi set, and no self-doubt whatsoever.
P.S. You make me sick.
She could have been the 5th Mrs. Bernard if I'd played my cards wrong. Trouble was, she had the most extraordinary ideas about what's called settling down. This is a very curious phrase used only by women. I've seen feathered birds settling down. I've seen dust settling down. I've seen bookmakers settling up even. But what do all these women mean by settling down? I suspect they mean that life is no laughing matter. You could have fooled me. But what puzzles me is what on earth did my 4 wives think they were getting when they married me? I mean, you can see a train when it's coming. But they thought I'd change and settle down. As a matter of fact, I think I have settled down, insofar as I'm pretty set in my ways. I've come to terms with the fact that my dinner is in the oven and always will be. I've also learned to accept the fact that
You only get out of life what you put into it.
the sagacious prick who gave me that piece of information would have had his teeth knocked out if I hadn't been in an alcoholic and diabetic coma at the time. But he meant well. Never trust people who mean well. Hitler probably meant well, and Cromwell certainly hoped we'd change and settle down. Anyway, I was tremendously flattered when this girl said to me,
When I first saw you in the pub, I said to myself, what's this handsome man doing surrounded by rogues?
apart from her suspect eyesight, she's answered her own question, if you see what I mean. Surrounded by rogues? Say no more. But for her, I try to change and settle down. Darling, I've asked a few rogues to Sunday lunch. No Knickers Joyce says she'll weed the border. Maltese Mary's going to mow the lawn. And Norman says he'll carve the joint. We could play bridge in the evening, and perhaps we might splash out on a bottle of sherry.
Oh, Geoffrey, you're an absolute poppet. I'm so glad you changed and settled down. You don't miss Soho and all those awful people, do you, darling?
Of course not, my angel. Take your knickers off. Oops, sorry, forgot. We're married and settled down in Chislehurst. But if I never change, neither do they. When they leave you, for instance, I wonder who writes their scripts.
It's over. You've snapped at me for the last time. As far as I'm concerned, anything there was is finished.
I can't say I was surprised, but I still couldn't get onto her wavelength. You might know that strange thought process. It's got nothing to do with arrogance or conceit. Simply a dull amazement at the fact that someone can't see how truly wonderful you are. I mean, there you are, standing right in front of them, the never-to-be-repeated offer of a lifetime. In your prime, and only a short climb away from your peak. And the fools can't see it. It never fails to amaze me.
I don't mind going to the cinema with you, or going Dutch for a meal, but so far as anything else is concerned, it's over.
She waited for me to say something. I stood there thinking of about 6 different things at once.
Aren't you going to say anything?
I couldn't. I was miles away. The business about going Dutch had really got me. I had a vision of us drifting in and out of cinemas and restaurants, and me, or worse still, her, always saying to the management,
"Do you mind if we have separate bills? You see, I don't sleep with him anymore."
Also, I was thinking how very hard it would be to replace her. She still stood staring at me, her brown eyes flecked with malice and...
Well?
I still couldn't think of anything to say memorable enough to haunt her for the rest of her days. So I put on my mask of tragedy and went through the usual motions of offering up the late, late prayer. It's one all hopeless punters mutter in betting shops, and it goes...
Please, God, let's start again. I know I've been a fool, but if this horse wins the last race, I promise I'll never have another bet again.
Ever. But it doesn't work with women. Come to that, doesn't work with horses either.
Very well.
Suddenly I saw that picture from my school days of Napoleon on the deck of the Bellerophon saying farewell to Europe. Only it wasn't Napoleon. It was me. Actually more post-Charing Cross than post-Waterloo as far as I was concerned. Upset, yes. No one likes their sweets taken away. But I wasn't heartbroken.
So, it's goodbye then.
Then she shrugged her mouth and left. I found myself thinking, it's just like they say it is in novels. Women really do turn on their heels when they go. I watched her down the stairs and heard the front door close, and then I heard her nasty, tinny little Renault starting up below. I waited for her to crash the gears, but she didn't. It's bloody fantastic, I thought while I made some tea. After a scene like that, she remains so icy cold that for once she doesn't make a mess of the gears. I mean, I ask you, would a man remain so utterly cool after closing a rhapsodical chapter in his life? Not him. He'd drive straight into the wall, blinded by tears at a moderately safe 15 miles an hour, and she'd come running down the stairs and out into the street, deliciously blaming herself. That's better. I took my cup of tea into the sitting room and sat there, wondering at my own coolness. I felt quite ashamed not being more upset, so I put some Mahler on to see if he could provoke the appropriate misery. Nothing. In fact, I sat there listening to the syrup, feeling distinctly irritated. She'd be on the phone now, I reckoned, to an old, reliable friend. Oh, God. How I hate those old, reliable, pipe-smoking friends who, of course, never laid a finger on the lady in question. They lecture at some obscure university on Anglo-Saxon pottery, and you can't get more decent than that. The bugger's just been waiting for her affair to go on the rocks. Up until then, he's been hanging around like a non-functioning lighthouse. But now he suddenly lights up.
No, actually, I was very fond of him, Bob.
They've always got old, reliable names like Bob.
It's just that he needs more love than I can possibly give him.
I know, darling, I know.
Says Bob, patting her hand while at the same time catching the wine waiter's eye, filling his pipe with some Bruno, grinding the peppermill over Madame's artichoke, and scribbling a note about a new find of 6th century cocoa mugs near Winchester.
I really was very attached to him. It's just that I couldn't take any more of his eternal snapping.
I know.
But you must have known it couldn't last.
They always say that. I wonder they don't set themselves up as bloody fortune tellers.
I could tell he was trouble from the moment I set eyes on him. But of course one doesn't like to pour cold water on love's young dream.
How about throwing up on it, then? So, after plying her with wine, he wastes a good dinner by pouring her into a taxi with the words,
What you need, my dear, is a good night's sleep. Now you just try to forget all about him.
Dear Bob, I don't know what I'd do without you.
oh, that happened a long time ago. I haven't seen her since. The marla's well scratched by now, and I've licked my wounds clean. Then 2 weeks ago, she had the cheek to ring me up and ask if I happened to know of a good plumber. Some people have no sensitivity whatsoever. God, I hate flat hunting. And I hate staying with people while I'm looking for somewhere to live. No matter how kind and generous they are, you can see them looking at you all the time with their eyes pleading.
Please, Jeff, don't get pissed and set the flat on fire.
One thing I know, I'll never again live anywhere beyond staggering distance of the coach and horses. I pitched tent in Soho at around 13, and it's been a downhill struggle ever since. And if anyone wonders how such a dump could possibly have gripped me and seduced me, then they didn't know Soho when you could end up drunk, penniless and alone, on less than £1. To step out of both the classroom and my mother's Dresden-littered drawing room into this enchanted dung heap was like waking up in Disneyland. Treasure Island, Pleasure Island, you name it. And what an incredible mixture I've had the luck to stumble across. Mostly in the gutter, where you find the best company: poets, painters, prostitutes, bookies, runners, bohemians, bums, philosophers, crooks, cranks, Dylan Thomas, Francis Bacon, Lucien Freud, John Minton, Frank Norman, French Vera, no Knickers Joyce, Sid the Swimmer, Ironfoot Jack, Nina Hamlet, Muriel Belcher. She ran the Colony Club, or Muriel's as it was always known. I can see her now, sitting on her stool at the end of the bar, like a raven on its perch, and chatting up the punters.
Come on, spend up. You're not buying enough champagne. You a member, sir? Go on then, fuck off. Members only.
She did have her favourites, though. There was a charming old queen who worked in the city and drank Scotch for England at Muriel's every evening. He was more or less a club hostess, but it happened that he'd won the Military Cross in 1916 when he was a captain in the Guards. And whenever anyone asked Muriel why she'd put up with him, she always said,
She was a very brave little woman at the Somme.
There was this bearded bugger, well known for his compulsive verbosity. One afternoon he walked into Muriel's and said,
Muriel, I'm worried. I've got to go to a fancy dress party tonight and I can't think what to go as.
Why don't you put talc on your chin and go as an armpit?
Of course, it was all too good to miss a moment of, so working for a living was out of the question. I did the odd job, obligatory in the life of a bum: navvying, dishwashing, acting, even a spell down a coal mine, and then in a boxing booth in a fairground. But I was always drawn back to Soho, who was always there waiting with open arms and legs. Lifetime of tapes. Rosen Cavalier. That must be when I was working at Covent Garden as a scene shifter. Do you know, the flymen and scene shifters at the Royal Opera House are the most discriminating critics you could wish to meet. I'd trust their judgment rather than those long-haired prats on Radio 3 any day.
Tell you what, Jeff, I don't care who she is. I'll shit better Rosen Cavaliers than this one.
Norman, will you please answer the bloody phone? I'm locked in your pub and drinking all your vodka. And another thing, there is no ice. Not that that'd move him, the ungracious bugger. Yesterday I asked him for the menu and he threw it at me. And when he brought my cottage pie, I thought he was going to throw that at me too. Instead, he said to the man sitting on the bar stool, "Get off your arse and let Jeff sit down. He's fucking ill." I am fucking ill too, as the Spectator always puts it when I'm too fucking ill to write my column.
Geoffrey Bernard is unwell.
I tell a lie. They don't invariably say that. They have been known to put it another way.
Geoffrey Bernard's column does not appear this week, as it is remarkably similar to that which he wrote last week.
Why do you drink so much, Mr. Bernard?
Stop myself from jogging, nurse. Oh. Thank you for the sporting life. I'm about to do you a favour. I'm going to refrain from advising you what to back in the big race tomorrow. A tip is only an opinion, and I'll give you a tip. The nearer the horse's mouth it is, the more it's worth ignoring, and that goes each way. The trouble with betting is that if you lose, you lose. And if you win, you think about how much more you could have won if you doubled your stake. It's pathetic, really. I think a psychiatrist I know probably hit the nail on the head when he described punting as
collecting injustices.
That was when I was in a very curious establishment in Surrey, which was like a gambling research clinic. On the third day of my confinement, the psychiatrist came along, sat down beside my bed with a great wad of papers, an instrument for measuring blood pressure, a thermometer, and the sporting life. I thought he was going to delve into my childhood and establish whether I still felt guilt at introducing the sport of masturbation to my prep school. As a matter of fact, I felt like Marco Polo returning to Europe with the new invention of gunpowder. And soon the whole school was rocked to its foundations, both metaphorically and physically. But not a bit of it. He went straight to the point.
Do you think King's Ransom has a better chance than Baby Dumpling at York this afternoon?
No, looking at the weights, I'd say that Baby Dumpling has a better chance than King's Ransom.
You really are in a bad way, my friend. King's Ransom will piss it.
He then went off to back King's Ransom and thus prove I was mad. But Baby Dumpling pissed it.
I should be careful, Mr. Bernard. We had a man in here who was such a good tipster, the psychiatrist kept him in for 5 months.
I became hooked on racing when I was about 16 and doing time in a disgusting naval college called Pangbourne. A boy called Vickers got 12 of the best, the maximum, for running a book. I was deeply impressed. It put gambling in the same wicked league as drinking and sex, and if it was as bad as that, I wanted some of it. It took 35 years for retribution to set in. Not 12 of the best, but an appearance at Bow Street Magistrates' Court. After a long series of contributions to the Joe Correll Benevolent Fund, my luck changed, or so I believed at the time. I had a Yankee up and won over $2,000. A big win for a small punter. It was the sort of win that compensates for all the losses. But then I began to reflect that since it had taken 3.5 decades to arrive at that one big win, punting was indeed a mug's game after all. So I decided to open a book, just among friends and acquaintances, in a small, fun sort of a way. But the law didn't see it quite like that, and my luck changed again.
On 13th of June, at approximately 1400 hours, I entered the Coach and Horses public house, Greek Street, London, W1, as an officer of Customs and Excise. A television was switched on, showing racing from Sandown and York. A man who I now know to be Geoffrey Bernard said,
"Does anyone want anything on this?"
just as the 3 o'clock race from Sandown was starting. I asked a woman at the bar for the running number of a horse called Bonamy. She consulted her newspaper and replied. At this point, Mr. Bernard said to me,
"Do you want to bet?"
I handed him 2 £1 coins and asked for Bonamy. 2 other customers handed Mr. Bernard coins, and both asked for bonhomie. Mr. Bernard turned to female companion and said,
"If bonhomie wins, I'm fucked."
Bonhomie lost, and I left the premises at approximately 15:18 hours.
Would you care to sit down, Mr. Bernard? Just a few questions. Now, do you pay tax to the government on these bets you've been taking?
How could I? I'm not a licensed bookmaker.
Do you think it's against the law not to pay tax?
I do now.
Why do the regulars bet with you rather than go to the Mecca around the corner?
They regard it as fun and are too lazy to walk to the betting shop and desert their drinks. It's a joke between us. I think they're fools and they think I'm one. We're taking the piss out of one another.
Do they bet with you because you don't charge tax?
You'd have to be friends or acquaintances, not strangers. Most of them are good mates.
Would you be surprised to know you've accepted bets from customs officers?
Fuck. It took 9 policemen and 3 customs men in 1 wagon and 1 squad car to arrest me. Little me. At how much public expense, I don't know. But they recovered the vital sum of £31.12 in evading betting tax.
Anything known?
Not a lot. I was once nicked for going over the top with a rubber plant in the Raj of India restaurant. Then I collected another bit of criminal record for kicking someone's car parked annoyingly on the pavement. A CID man arrested me here in the Coach and Horses and took me to Vine Street to be fingerprinted and photographed. But here's an extraordinary thing. As we were walking past a certain pub on our way to the Nick, the detective suddenly said,
You screwed the landlord's daughter here in 1976, didn't you?
I was amazed how anyone but me and the second party could have knowledge of what went on that Christmas day on the saloon bar floor when the governor went upstairs for his after-lunch nap. I'll never know. But I like the magistrate. He looked up my previous form and said,
The last time it was rubber plants, Mr. Bernard. Now it's cars. What next?
Keeping a book without paying betting tax, that's what's next.
Quite. Fine £200 and £50 costs.
Ah, well, a mere flea bite compared with what the sods did to Lester Piggott. And as we always say around here, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. Oh dear. When Norman finally does surface, he's going to think I look even more dishevelled than after that night I spent in the ditch of this celebrated pond fence at Sandown. Don't know how I got there, or who my companion was, but we got on famously. Need a clean shirt. Here we are. People are always surprised to find that I'm a domestic animal. Well, who the hell do they think washes my glass up every morning if there's no one else there to do it? I cook, I sew, I reap, What's this? Slightly rhyming verses for Jeff Bernard's 50th birthday by Elizabeth Smart.
Wilde would have smiled and been beguiled and bright enough to know that you had a better muse in tow than he. Could he see the angelic emanations from gutters where we all fall while trying to pee, and rise, or try to rise, unwisely in majesty? Your subject is not mean, who's up, who's in, or jockeying for position. What a dreary sin. Funny but kind, your subject is justly seen as the inexhaustible one of nude mankind. Yourself, in fact, drinking amidst the alien corn and explaining the amazing joke of being born.
It's terrible to think that dear Elizabeth got me my first job in journalism. We got drunk together one lunchtime and she took me back to her office at Queen magazine and said to the editor, give him a job. He did. Until then, I was a reasonably happy, sane stagehand. She's dead now. Like too many of my friends. God forgive you and rest in peace, Elizabeth. And if anyone writes to tell me you only get out of life what you put into it, I might just kill them. That was the most touching, but not the only poem I've had addressed to me.
With the crown of thorns I wear, why do I need a prick like you? If you choose to bugger off, it isn't going to spoil the view. I've been put down by the best and crucified by experts, dear, and I really do not need a friend like you to bend my ear. You claim that generosity is something that I lack. May I suggest you've had from me much more than you gave back. So don't think I'll mope and mourn because you tell me that we're through. With the crown of thorns I wear, I sure don't need a prick like you. Geoffrey, I want to know who wrote that poem to you and why. Jeff? Geoffrey? Oh, you make me sick.
Oh, fuck. What? Oh, fuck. Another fire. Oh, this is going to do my reputation no good whatsoever, such as it is. How absurd. How ridiculously absurd. Which makes me a survivor, I suppose. A good friend of mine, Eva Johansson, used to say you can't get through life without a highly developed sense of the absurd. She could well have been here now to recognize the absurdity of my situation, but one night she went to bed with a lit cigarette in her hand, and in her case, she was taken seriously. How inconsiderate, Eva. Soon there'll be no one left to drink with at all. The rows we had. Always in pubs, and if Norman or some other anxious landlord tried to intervene, she'd say with her winning smile,
Oh, it's quite all right. This is a friend of mine, and I'm just trying to explain to him what a stupid bastard he is.
Our longest-standing row goes back to when I was living in the country, and I asked her what she'd like for breakfast.
A slice of cold, rare roast beef and a glass of Tio Pepe, preferably chilled.
Why can't you have a fucking egg like everyone else, you flash cow?
Because I'm not like anyone else.
And she wasn't. One of these people, she used to call these people, approached her here in the Coach and Horses with a view to picking her up.
Morning. Nice day.
Your place or mine.
Exit frightened rabbit. Someone who did succeed in picking her up and became a close friend one day said to her, for some reason,
You know, Eva, if I hadn't met you, I think I would have taken up keeping bees.
He was ever after known as the beekeeper, and Eva said,
The poor sod wanted to keep bees and ended up with a hornet's nest.
Some months before she set herself on fire, she wrote to me, and it was a case of like calling like.
So, I have no flat, no job, no lover, no income, and as far as I can see, no prospects. Even my cat has left me. I keep sitting around expecting fear, and all I'm getting is exhilaration. Here I am, exulting in the clean, dry air of absolute selfishness, secure in the knowledge that there is nothing more they can do to me. If it weren't so totally out of keeping with everything I've been told, I'd say it could only be described as happiness.
Oh, wake up, Norman. Engaged. At least that means he's stirring. You won't begrudge me breakfast, will you, Norman? Now, shall it be tea and bickies? Tea and vinegar-flavoured crisps? Tea and tortilla chips? Tea and roasted peanuts? Or tea and pork scratchings? Oh, and is it possible to boil an egg in an electric kettle? Tea and bickies, I think. Fuck! Oh. Now, what was that trick Keith Waterhouse used to do on the dance floor of the old establishment club with a biscuit tin lid? What else? Pint glass of water. Matchbox. His right shoe. And, of course, a raw egg. What you do is set the biscuit tin lid side squarely over the pint glass. So. Then you make a funnel of the matchbox sleeve and you place it on top of the lid. Bang in the centre. Then you perch the raw egg on the funnel, and what you do then is you give the biscuit tin lid such an almighty thwack with the heel of your shoe that it flies across the room and the egg plops into the glass. Or not, as the case may be. You need a good, unsteady hand, Keith says. Here we go. 1, 2. I wish I hadn't done that. Next thing I'll be telling Irish jokes. But if memory serves me right, which it doesn't very often, we were talking about racing. The racing world is stuffed with lunatics, criminals, idiots, charmers, bastards, and exceptionally nice people. Like, for instance, Valentine Dial, the actor. Remember the Man in Black on radio? Who was responsible for a classic exchange in the bankruptcy court.
To what do you attribute your downfall, Mr. Dial?
2.5-mile handicap hurdle, sir.
As for my own downfall, I attribute it to my parentage. I was sired by a scenic designer who was himself by a theatrical impresario out of an actress. My dam was an opera singer who was by an itinerant pork butcher out of a gypsy. My mother was very beautiful, and she had style. She wanted to turn me into an officer and a gentleman, but at the same time she was throwing occasional cocktail parties for musicians, actors, actresses, and similar interesting riffraff, and it didn't take me long to see that they were all getting a little more out of life than the Latin master at my prep school, or the local grocer in Holland Park. At Naval College, I fell naturally into the company of secret goldflake smokers and cherry brandy swiggers who got into trouble. And eventually, the officer and gentleman idea was knocked on the head by being asked to leave. The captain of the college paid me the greatest backhanded compliment I've ever received.
Dear Mrs. Bernard, while I consider Geoffrey to be psychologically unsuitable for public school life, I believe he has a great future as a seam bowler.
And with that reference, I set out on the great journey of life in search of more trouble. I didn't have to look further than the racecourse. The true gambler will, of course, bet on anything, and there's no cure. When there's nothing left to bet on, I sometimes worry quite seriously about going mad. In fact, another winter might do it. The long-range weatherman says the athletes among us will be skating on the Thames come January. And you know what that means, don't you? No racing.
Not necessarily.
The thin dividing line between sanity and insanity was breached the last time we had a surfeit of snow and ice by the bloke in this picture, and an equally mad bugger known as Tom the copywriter. Plus my good self. The bloke's name is Casper. He works, or did work, until he was fired for spending too long in the betting shop in one of the foreign embassies. Not exactly a career diplomat. But what's a career when there's racing at Doncaster? Casper's wife left him after he told her, in a moment of intoxication and great frankness, that in his considered opinion, when it came to who had the strongest hold on his affections, his wife or the great Italian racehorse Rebo won by a furlong. So there he was, living all alone in this enormous flat opposite Battersea Park with his two cats, Keir Hardie and George Lansbury, because he was something of a socialist, was Casper. And then it began to piss down with snow.
Disaster. All racing cancelled.
Not necessarily.
For 3 weeks we fidgeted here in the pub, reliving the glories of our past wins and near misses, nigh desperate for a horse to lose our money on. Then, on the 22nd day of the great cold spell, Casper walked in and said,
Who fancies coming racing tonight?
Where? Australia or California?
Battersea.
There's been no racing at Battersea for a month.
Not dog racing, my friend. Cat racing.
When I spoke of going mad, I didn't necessarily mean I'd be the first in our little group to crack. Cat racing?
Round at my place.
That'd be a flat race, of course.
Normally, yes. But since we're in the middle of the national hunt season, I've had to build a hurdle course. 4 jumps, and it's a good 40 feet from the starting post at the kitchen end of the passage to the front door, so we get a good run for our money.
What are the odds?
Keir Hardie, 3-1 the field.
Both under starters' orders, are they?
Well, put it this way, Tom. I haven't fed these cats for 2 days. Now, I'm going to place a saucer of tinned salmon here by the door. Give them a sniff of it. Then back to the kitchen, and they're off.
But they're not.
No, not yet, they're not. Hold on, Keir Hardie, for me, would you? It's a 7:30 meeting, isn't it?
Of course it is. It's only 7:29. You've got to do these things right. George Lansbury looks a goer. I'll have a pound to win.
Same on this bugger.
And let it go, Tom. There you go. They're off. Oh, come on. Yes. Come on, darling. Jump, you bastards. Jump.
Keir Hardie by 3 lengths. While he and the runner-up attacked their tinned salmon, Casper, Tom and I retired to the sitting room, hereinafter referred to as the steward's room, to discuss the next meeting.
I've got a moggy I wouldn't mind entering, Casper. A little tabby called Samantha.
Ah, a filly.
2-year-old.
When can I see a gallop?
Mornings in the backyard.
Form?
She's never been in a cat race, but with the dog next door behind her, she's a goer.
She's entered.
Samantha missed the first race, being delayed on the tube due to incident on line at Earl's Court. Some poor frozen sod threw himself under the train in a last desperate attempt to get warm, I shouldn't wonder. Keir Hardie once again romped it, and once again I went down on George Lansbury, whose form I was led to believe had improved. This is not going to be a bundle of laughs if the favourite's going to win every time.
You're right. When Samantha turns up, we'll make it a handicap race.
How do you propose to do that?
With the weights of the kitchen scales.
We agreed that if a horse got 3 pounds for a length, then cat should get an ounce for a length. Keir Hardie finished up carrying 3 ounces, stuck to his back with sellotape. Then Tom turned up with Samantha, this evil-looking tabby outsider. Samantha was very much on edge, and a few years in the racing game made me immediately suspicious when Tom asked, all nonchalant,
Anyone care to lay 4 fivers on her?
We declined, and I had a quid at threes on George Lansbury, who I was convinced was improving with every race.
And the starter's orders?
And they're off! And it's Keir Hardy away first, followed by Lansbury, then Samantha. Samantha's taking the lead over the first hurdle, under the second, and it's Samantha way in front of the rest. Nowhere as Samantha grabs Tina Salmon and tries to hurl herself through the fucking door. What a race! Samantha first, Lansbury second, Keir Hardy still struggling to the post.
Could I have a word with you, Tom?
You'd have thought Caspar was Lord Derby the way he carried on. He actually pulled a red handkerchief out of his pocket, which I correctly guessed to be Cat's racing equivalent to the red flag at Newmarket or Epsom, denoting a steward's inquiry.
You doped that cat, didn't you, Tom?
What are you talking about?
Come on. You gave it a dextrin or some sort of pet pill, didn't you?
You'd better watch what you're saying, Caspar. Nobody accuses me of cat doping.
Well, I'm accusing you, friend.
Right, come outside.
That was the end of cat racing. Or was it? A few weeks later, chancing to wake up in Battersea for reasons now lost in the mists of time, I was walking home through the park when who should I bump into but Caspar. What are you doing, Caspar?
Cantering Keir Hardy.
Oh, yes.
We could be in for a very hot summer. A drought, in fact. In which case, the going could be so hard that racing might be cancelled again. You never know, Jeff.
Never do. Just wait till the sun gets on his back. For God's sake. Talk about waiting for Godot. Now the bugger's not there. Must have gone to Smithfield to select savoury mince. Or New Covent Garden for today's dawn pluck crop of frozen peas. I need a shave. Now, what the fuck am I doing with last month's Vogue? Well, perhaps I'm supposed to be writing something for them. Who's in and who's out in the drinking clubs? No Knickers Joyce is in, Herpes Henry is out. In fact, he's barred for life. Or perhaps I'm in it. Geoffrey Bernard, seen throwing up over a friend on Ladies' Day at Royal Ascot. Well, the sun ought to be well over the yardarm somewhere in the world by now. Time for a Bloody Mary. The merit of these things is you can persuade yourself you're having breakfast, and a healthy one at that. Cheers. My own worst experience in the same direction was waking up in the bottom drawer of an Edwardian wardrobe, dying to spend a penny. Imagine trying to open a drawer from the inside and you'll appreciate my predicament. But however desperate, I would never have done it through the keyhole. I mean, just imagine if that dog had been of a more savage disposition. The eyes water just to think of it. I need this because I'm reluctantly reminded of the man in the paper who chopped off his own chopper and threw it on the fire so he could devote the rest of his life to God without any further distractions. With his wife's blessing, wouldn't you know? They'd been discussing it for 12 years. But what I want to know is why did the wretched man pick on his perfectly harmless cock? Surely he must have realised that sex is all in the mind, and that his dangler was merely his solo instrument in a far bigger concerto than you or I will ever comprehend. I mean, if I wanted to devote the rest of my life to any one thing at all without being distracted, I'd cut off my head. And another thing, why dispose of the blackballed ex-member on the fire? What on earth does he think waste paper baskets are for? And then, of course, I can't help wondering what this couple's sex life must have been like during their 12 years of disarmament talks. Pretty tentative, I should think. The fact that God didn't intervene in the matter proves my theory that he is a woman after all. Probably another Guardian reader. And who took the initiative? What a mug. I mean, it so happens I don't have a wife at the present moment, but if there chanced to be a Mrs. Bernard... Despite these occasional nightmares that there's the slightest chance of there ever being a fifth Mrs. Bernard, I've learnt very slowly that for a boozer on my scale, marriage is impossible. Drink is the other woman, with the evidence of the affair only too visible.
Come along, Mr. Bernard. There's only one place for you.
At last, after years of trying, I'd finally landed the spring double. Pneumonia and pleurisy. So here I was back in the same hospital where I was first shown the yellow card in December 1965. But this was the first time I'd ever been in hospital for something that wasn't self-inflicted. And that made it seem a little unfair. I mean, they didn't conscript kamikaze pilots, did they, nurse?
Eat your mince.
They put me in the Ellen Terry ward, just down the corridor from the Alfred Tennyson. The patients never change. They must be provided by some sort of agency. There's always a paisley dressing gown sort of bloke with a jar of Tiptree jam in the locker and trouble with what he called the old waterworks. There's always someone dying in a resigned sort of way. Otherwise, it's the usual cast. Sun readers to a man. They stare vacantly at Hungarian children's cartoons on the box all afternoon, occasionally coughing and farting. And to think that's going to be the curtain-down scene for most of us. And the menu for the Last Supper will be brown Windsor soup and minced beef with cabbage and boiled potatoes.
Just a little prick, Geoffrey.
Needless to say, in this situation, one's thoughts tend to drift towards the Grim Reaper. There's a dreadful fellow in the French pub who once tried to make a book on who would be the next in Soho for the last jump, and he made me 5-4 favourite, so he was pleased to tell me. But the long shots keep coming in, and although I'm only too delighted to survive, it's a lousy race to have been entered for. Frank Norman, John Lemez, Sean Lynch, who ran Jerry's Club, Dennis Shaw even, and dear old Jeremy Madden Simpson, rechristened by Eva Jeremy Madman Simpleton, certainly won't be walking into the Coach and Horses come opening time. Old? He hadn't turned 40. We first got really friendly after I broke a bone in my right hand on him one night in the French pub. For what reason? Neither of us could remember. But he'd say,
if you can't hit a friend, who can you hit?
Once, when I was at death's door in this very hospital, He used to visit me every evening with a croissant for tomorrow's breakfast. When a piss artist takes time off during licensed hours to visit you, you know you've got a friend. Sometimes I wonder whether this interval on Earth might be just a bit of nonsense. I think about all those friends who've gone. And the lunchtime sessions in the coach, when they were all still here, were worth all the trappings of the success stories you've ever heard. And I'd rather keep down with the likes of Jeremy than up with the Joneses. I do worry about my own wretched mortality, though. Shuffling off this mortal coil, it seems as though we're in a queue that's shuffling along towards some sort of a bus stop. Who's next? No, sorry, chum. You were before me. Maybe the party could go on, though. Different premises, no closing time. Kind of celestial and sterilised colony room club.
Are you trying to set the hospital on fire?
Just the bed, Doctor. I have no territorial ambitions.
I'm discharging you, Mr. Bernard, but I want you to do nothing at all for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
That shouldn't be too difficult.
By which I mean you're to stay at home.
Yes, Doctor. Home is where the heart is. I wonder if Norman would let me live here. I mean, considering I do live here, he might as well be charging rent. What did once strike me, though, is that I could hang about in the reject shop in the King's Road. I mean, I could actually get bought by someone quite nice. I see myself being bought by a tarty blonde who'd show me off to her friends in a sleazy afternoon drinking club in Shepherd's Market.
Yes, I bought him in the reject shop in Chelsea. It's not bad for 25 quid, including VAT. He couldn't get it up, mind you, when I first got him home. But it's amazing what a couple of stiff vodkas will do. Have another, ducks.
I can think of quite a number of personalities who could further their writing careers in the reject shop. For instance... Coach and horses?
Jeff?
Norman!
What the fuck are you doing?
What the fuck do you mean? What am I doing here?
I mean, what are you doing there?
How the fuck did you know I was fucking here?
I didn't. I was after the cleaning lady.
Ah, see.
Is she there?
The cleaning lady? No, she's not arrived yet. Any messages?
How on earth did you get in?
It's a long story, Norman. No, in fact, it's a short story. I fell asleep in the bog, and why the hell you don't call time, gentlemen, please, in the gents... I mean, I would have thought that it was some kind of legal requirement under the Landlord's Liability Act. Oh, and talking of the law, Norman, I appear to have caned the best part of a bottle of vodka. Does that count as drinking after hours? I mean, given the circumstances.
What?
I'll tell you one thing, Norman. The service was a bloody sight faster than it usually is. If you made this Britain's first self-service pub, you'd quadruple your takings overnight.
You pissed?
Yes, Norman.
You drunk me dry?
No, Norman. I owe you for vodka, 1 tomato juice, dash of Worcester sauce, 1 tea bag, a slightly cracked egg. Oh, and a tin of biscuits, which unfortunately became spilled.
What have you been up to all night?
What do you mean, what have I been up to all night? I've been sitting here, quietly nursing my drink and contemplating the meaning of life. It's all going to change, Norman, starting tomorrow.
Today, you mean?
All right, then, if you insist. A fucking day.
I do insist.
Now, how long are you going to be?
Don't you move until I get there.
Of course I won't move till you get here. Hardly in a position to move, am I?
And don't touch another thing.
I won't touch anything, Norman. I'll just get on with my packing.
You what?
My packing. It's another long story, mate.
All right, I'm coming.
Just get off your ass and get down here. He's coming. I've never seen Norman at 7 in the morning before. Should be a fascinating if grisly sight. Come to that, he's never seen me at 7 in the morning. People who have say I'm not at my best, though they do generously add that I'm not at my worst either. Dearest Jeff. Jeff, dear. Dear Jeff.
So looking forward to next weekend. Wasn't last weekend fun? Still missing you terribly. So looking forward to Friday. I waited and waited. Where were you? We must try harder. I'm tired of your excuses. We can't go on like this. I must have been mad to think it would work. It's goodbye, Geoffrey. This time I really mean it. You've gone too far.
And I make her sick. There's a bloke I know in what's left of Fleet Street who plans to sink his redundancy money into an establishment to be called the This Time I Really Mean It Hotel, specially designed for people who've just walked out on or been walked out on by their spouses. You could check in at any hour of the night without luggage. There'd be a razor, toothbrush, change of clothes on every pillow, along with the after-dinner Valium wrapped in tin foil. And there'd be a 24-hour bar known as the Gone Too Far Bar, where you could drink yourself silly. And every night they'd have an unhappy hour, when the drinks would cost double, and you could tell the barman your troubles. I wish you'd get on with it. I'd take a permanent suite. What's this? Oh, this is good. A demand from the Inland Revenue for £1,760? It's to be hoped they're pulling my pisser. 170 quid would just about crucify me, but 1,760 is a joke, utterly beyond me. There's always suicide, I suppose. So many of us around here have contemplated it at one time or another. That Dave in the French pub once had the idea of us all hiring a coach and driving it over Beachy Head. 52 seats only. Booked now to avoid disappointment. I'd better have the one. Norman? Nah, it's the milkman. Always a signal to the law-abiding citizen to be making tracks home. If he had a home to go to. What the hell? This is home. Sitting by the bedside of dying Soho, holding her hand, but wondering would it be kinder to switch off the life support system. What an amazing jemmy to the door of the mind is a few large vodkas.
Let's start a club for people who've been barred from all the others. Instead of throwing members out, we'll throw them in.
You don't bring me flowers anymore.
Don't worry, Jeff. Give it back when you get a win.
Couldn't you have telephoned?
Now, if I put you in a cab, will you promise not to fall out the other door?
You only get out of life what you put into it.
Fancy a spot of cat racing, Jeff?
You're a mean, alcoholic, diabetic little prick.
And
You make me sick. But you're never snide, and you never hurt, and you wouldn't want to win on a doctored beast, and anyway the least of your pleasures resides in paltry measures. So guard, great joker, God, please guard this great Bernard. Let him be known for the prince of men he is, a master at taking out of himself and us the piss.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The bugger's here at last. Come on, Goddo! And I meant what I said. Norman, it's all going to change starting to fucking day. It's new leaf time. From now on, it'll be gin instead of vodka, capstan full strength instead of senior service, and the French pub instead of the coach and horses. Her life does go on, whatever proof there may be to the contrary. Last week I had an erection. I was so amazed I took its photograph. Life after death? What more do you want? Come on, Norman.
In Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell by Keith Waterhouse, adapted for radio by John Peacock, John Hurt was Geoffrey Bernard. All other parts were played by Nicola McAuliffe, Jeff Rawle, Amelia Bullmore and Miles Jupp. Geoffrey Bernard is Unwell was directed by Celia de Wolfe and was a peer production for BBC Radio 4.